going to stop talking and actually just play Jeb Bush and his commentary. It's only about 40 seconds long, so let's listen
Governor,
in.
you mentioned taxes, lowering them. You have anything flat tax or anything specific?
We're working on a strategy that's under, I'd say, my aspiration for the country, and I believe we can achieve it, is 4% growth as far as the eye can see, which means we have to be a lot more productive. Workforce participation has to rise from its all-time modern lows. Means that people need to work longer hours and through their productivity gain more income for their families. That's the only way we're going to get out of this rut that we're in.
That's the only way we're going to get out of the rut
taxes
that we are in. You know what? The thing, he absolutely believes this. This came from him. This is not a talking point. Nobody put this in front of him. Jeb Bush absolutely believes that the American workforce is not productive enough, that we don't work enough, that we don't work in enough hours. This coming from a person who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Without question, he was handed most of everything that he has. And he looks at the workforce. First of all, let me start at the very beginning. He says that he wants the economy to grow at 4% as far as the eye can see. Now, anybody who has done, and I'm gonna sound like Olivia for a second here. Anyone who knows anything about economics knows that a fully developed economy like the United States of America, which is a fully developed economy, it is going to settle. Generally, when it settles around 3%. When our economy grows, it grows at about a rate of 3%. We came out of a recession, which means we were not growing at that amount, and we are getting closer back to 3%. I didn't look this up. I should have looked this up before today. Somebody can look it up and tell me how close we are to 3% right now. But any fully developed economy is going to grow at 3%. 4% is, and it may not seem like a big difference to you, but the difference between 3% and 4% is a couple of billion, $100 billion. And so it's a very significant difference, but it's unrealistic for a fully developed economy. Period. Jeb Bush knows this, but he has to offer something so that he can seem to one-up President Obama's recovery. The recovery that we have quite frankly, recovering from his brother. Now, I can go into the fact that Jeb Bush has his entire team. His entire team is pretty much the team of his brother. But because he wants to make it seem like he has a better idea, he throws out this fairy tale of 4%. We are not going to reach 4% growth in the United States of America, not because we don't work hard enough, Jeb Bush, not because we don't put in enough hours, not because of anything like that, simply because economically speaking, we are a fully developed economy. And unless some brand new technology comes along, unless some game-changing technology industry comes along, we are not going to see a 4 or 5% increase. You see that in nations like China, who they're in a recession, they're slowing down, but they were a developing country. Developing countries have the opportunity and the advantage of growing at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. That is not the case for a fully developed economy. You can look across the world. Okay, now getting off of my economic pulpit, the insinuation that Americans aren't working hard enough and that the only way we can grow is if Americans work harder it's disingenuous and it's insulting, right? It's insulting because right now Americans are working harder than ever before. We work harder than Jeb Bush has ever worked in his life. And that's period. I don't think Jeb Bush has ever had, and we're talking about two different things, but right now I'm speaking about this working harder. And then we'll talk about efficiency. Jeb Bush has never worked more than a single job in his life. He's not one of those kids that have to go to college and work a job just to pay their way through college. So how is he going to lecture us about having to work harder when he doesn't understand working hard? What he understands is being born with opportunities that no one else is born with, being born into a family that is politically and economically rich, who has the connections and the power to do anything that they want. Because who else could get into, I believe, one of them went to Yale, one of them went to Harvard. Who else could get into Harvard with mediocre C grades? You and I can't. The people whose parents are working 40 and 50 and 60 hours a week, we can't get into Harvard with C grades. Who else could become the president of the United States with the DUI on their record? Who else could become, let's back it up. Who else can become governor of a state with barely any meaningful work experience that was not handed to him by his daddy? So this lecturing that comes from the political right so often is so insulting, so disingenuous. And we saw this type of rhetoric with Newt Gingrich back in the 2012 election, when during the debates, when he said that minorities and poor people, let me not misquote him, poor people don't have any examples of hard work, of hard workers. In the minds of these uber rich and uber political, politically powerful people, they think that we're sitting around doing nothing, just waiting to collect our welfare checks. You know what I mean? They don't see the fact, or they don't acknowledge, because you have to see it. They don't acknowledge the fact that people get up at 5 a.m. to catch a bus to go to the other side of town just to clean up damn bathrooms for rich people and for middle-class people who have average jobs, right? It's not just, they go downtown and they work 60 hours a week, 40 hours on one job and 20 hours on a part-time job. I know this because I did this. I worked 3 jobs. I worked 3 jobs from 5 a.m. to midnight every single damn day. And it was only enough to help me get by, only enough to make sure that my kids could stay in school. So this entire mentality that comes from Republicans about, and if you have ever heard a Democrat say this, please send it to me, because I will embass them the same way. I will give it to them the same way. But this narrative that Americans just don't work hard enough is a lie. Because we are working 2 and 3 jobs, not to get rich, but just to keep our lights on, just to make sure our kids can go to the schools they need to, just to make sure that we have food in our refrigerator. And why is that, Jeb Bush? Good question. I'm glad you asked. The reason we are having to work so many jobs is because we have only seen a 5% increase in average wages since 1979. Since 1979, we have only seen a 5% increase, whereas the top 1% has seen 75, 80, 90, 95% increases in their wealth and in their wages. But us measly people at the bottom, those of us who have to get up at 5 a.m. just to catch the blue line, just to get downtown so we can clean up and make sure the offices are right. Those of us who are working 3 jobs just to make sure our kids are taken care of, we haven't seen but a 5% increase in our wages in an entire generation. But to his second point, we have to be more efficient. Well, how much more efficient do you want us? We have seen since 1979, between 1979 and 2012, we've seen a 75% increase in productivity of the American worker. So the American worker is more efficient than ever before. We're working longer hours than ever before. And not just people with entry level and janitorial, those type of jobs, but even the average guy. Let's take a computer programmer who's making a decent living. Let's say he's making $80,000 a year, right? Which is a decent living depending on where you live. If you live in Boston, you might be struggling still. If you live in New York, you're definitely struggling. But let's take an entry level engineer, computer engineer. He not only is efficient on the clock, but he takes his computer home and he's working around the clock. We don't get off work anymore. We don't even get vacation anymore. When we go to vacation, most of us take our laptops with us and we're working. So we are more efficient. We're working longer hours. But apparently in the world of Jeb Bush, he only sees what so many of the aristocratic class sees, which is, oh, these poor people are poor because they don't work hard enough. Never even engaging in a conversation of systemic problems with the manner in which we engage in capitalism, systemic problems with our tax code, which systemic problems in just across the board, which keeps us at a level of I can't even say that word. I'm just gonna charge that one to the game, folks. Subsistence. I bit off more than I can chew. I'm usually verbose. I'll Google it and I'll have it right by Monday. But anyway, it keeps us at a level of check to check. Let me just use layman's terms. We are living from check to check, even though we're working harder than ever before, more efficient than ever before. And the Republican platform, apparently, because who else is going to be the nominee? Jeb Bush believes that we need to do more. And this coming from a person who was born into privilege, born into opulence, born into any and every opportunity he would ever want. I think every person should have a problem with that. But I'm wondering, here are my political lenses here. I'm wondering how the working class of the Republican Party, I wonder how that guy who gets up at 5 a.m. in Mississippi and goes out to the warehouse at 6 a.m. in the morning and he works until the sun goes down. I wonder how they are going to translate this message and make him believe all he needs to do is work harder. That's what I want to know. I want to know how the Republican Party is going to convince people that Jeb Bush is right when so many of their own people are the working poor who work 60 hours a week, who slave at their jobs. I wonder, because that's been the magic of the Republican Party for the last I don't know how long they've been doing this magical game of getting people to vote against their best interests by making them believe in the rags to riches story, when the only people who should believe in the rags to riches story are the people with the riches. Because those of us with the rags, we have been sold a pipe dream. But how? I wonder how he is going to convince those white middle class, lower middle class, working poor people in Mississippi, in the Delta, in Arkansas, in Louisiana, in Kansas, who are slaving away, working just as hard as you and I. How are they going to convince them that all they need to do is work harder? Because that is what they have done consistently. They've consistently had an entire group of people willingly, joyfully, voting against their best interests because they believe that America is going to work for them eventually. Voting for the Republican Party is going to work for them eventually. Someone just sent me a message saying that he has the taskmaster or the slave master mentality. I would, in a certain extent, I think I would concur, because there's the mindset that all we need to do is just get more out of them. And you know what? I understand how you can. No, I don't. No, I try to be objective sometimes, and to a fault. I don't understand how you can look at the facts that we are 75% more productive, but we've only seen a 5% increase in wages. And I'm going to mess up these stats because I'm going from memory, but I was reading an article that says that if we were being paid based on the rate at which we have been more productive, then the minimum wage would be $22 an hour versus, what is it now, $9 an hour. That is the disparity in which we live under. That is the paradigm that we have lived under for the last 30 plus years, 35 years. That is the world that was shaped by Ronald Reagan in 1981. And that is the world, quite frankly, that is still being, that has not been turned around by Clinton in the 90s. And quite frankly, I have not seen President Obama do enough to turn us around from that paradigm shift. We have been living underneath the paradigm. And look at the stats. 1979 was the last time we saw a meaningful increase in wages. What happened in 1979 and 1980? We elected Reagan. 1981, he passed the Roth-Kemp's tax cuts, which dramatically reshaped the entire tax structure and the entire ideological political structure of the United States. And we've been living underneath that forever. Folks, I've got to take a quick break. When I come back, I'm going to deal a little bit more with that. And we're going to deal a little bit more with this Christian persecution complex. I've got a lot going on today, folks. This is the Benjamin Dixon Show.
You're tuned in to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Join the conversation. 857-600-0518.